Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay updated with every new story. You think you can carry the Barrett 50? It weighs more than you do. The young private jeered, triggering laughter throughout the armory. Elena Vasquez didn't answer. She quietly cleaned each piece of the rifle as if she had done it 1,000 times before. But when SEAL Commander Ethan Caldwell stopped in his tracks, his gaze hardened because he had just realized the shocking truth. That small woman was the holder of the 3,247-era kill record. The armory was a concrete box, cold even in the desert heat, with racks of rifles lining the walls and the sharp smell of gun oil hanging in the air. Elena stood at a workbench, her small frame barely reaching the height of the taller soldiers around her. She was 29, Colombian-born with dark hair pulled back tight and no makeup on her face. Her fatigues were plain, her boots worn but clean, and she moved with a quiet focus that made the noise around her feel louder. The other soldiers, all men, lounged against the walls or leaned over tables, their voices rough with bravado. They saw her and assumed she didn't belong. Too small, too quiet, too female. To them, she was an outsider, someone who'd wandered into their world by mistake. But Ethan, standing in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, saw something else. Her hands didn't shake as she disassembled the Barrett, each movement precise, like a dancer who had practiced the same steps for years. Private Tyler Brooks, a 21-year-old rookie with a cocky grin and a need to prove himself, wasn't done. "What's a girl like you even doing here? Going to use that rifle to prop up a tent?" His buddies roared, one slamming a hand on the table, the sound echoing off the concrete. Elena didn't look up. She wiped the barrel with a soft cloth, her fingers steady, her face blank. Ethan's eyes narrowed, but he stayed still, watching. He wanted to see how she'd handle it. She slid the C, a bolt back into place, the click cutting through the laughter like a knife. Then she paused just for a second and looked at Brooks. "You ever fire one of these?" she asked, her voice low, almost soft, like she was asking about his day. Brooks blinked, his grin slipping. The room went quiet, the other soldiers glancing at each other, unsure. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned back to the rifle, her hands moving again, and the moment passed. But Ethan didn't miss it. That question, that look. It wasn't loud, but it landed like a punch. As Elena packed her tools, a sergeant named Carter, a burly man with a perpetual scowl and a habit of talking over everyone, stepped forward. His voice dripped with condescension, like he was explaining something to a child. "Look, Vasquez, you're wasting space here. Why don't you stick to paperwork? Leave the real work to us." The room snickered, a few soldiers nudging each other, their eyes gleaming with amusement. Elena's hands slowed just for a moment as she folded her cleaning cloth with deliberate care. She looked up, her gaze steady, and tilted her head slightly. "You ever carried 50 kilos up a ridge under fire?" Her voice was calm, almost curious, but it cut through the room like a whip. Carter's scowl faltered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The snickers died, replaced by awkward coughs. Elena slung her bag over her shoulder and walked out, her steps light but firm, leaving a heavy silence behind her. Another soldier, Jenkins, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a smile that never reached his eyes, leaned forward. He was the kind who always needed to be the loudest, the one who'd do anything for a nod from the group. "Hey, Vasquez, you ever even shot that thing? Or are you just here to polish it for the real shooters?" The room erupted again, the laughter sharp and mean like glass breaking. Elena kept working, sliding tools into her canvas bag, her movements slow and deliberate. Jenkins pushed harder, his voice rising. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't waste our time. That Barrett's for guys who can handle the recoil. You'd probably fall over." A few soldiers nodded, their smirks wide, their eyes darting to see who'd laugh next. Elena zipped her bag, stood up straight, and looked right at Jenkins. You ever hit a target at 2 miles? She asked, her voice calm like she was asking for directions. Jenkins froze, his mouth half open like he'd been caught stealing. The room went silent again, and she walked out, her boots echoing on the concrete, leaving the men staring at the empty space where she'd been. Outside, the desert sun was relentless, the air thick with dust that stuck to her skin. Elena headed toward the barracks, her bag slung over one shoulder, the weight pulling at her small frame. She passed a group of officers by a Humvee, their cigarettes glowing in the dawn light, their eyes following her. One muttered something too low to hear, but she caught the tone. Dismissive, like she was a kid who'd wandered into the wrong room. She didn't turn. She'd heard it all before. Ever since she was a girl in Colombia, raised in a world of wealth and power she never wore on her sleeve. Her father, a man who'd built an empire from nothing, had taught her to move quietly, to let her actions speak. He'd sit her down at their sprawling estate, his voice firm but kind, telling her to never flaunt, never beg for respect. She had learned that lesson early, watching the gardeners work, their hands quick and sure. One of them, an old man with a scar across his cheek, had handed her a pellet gun when she was 8. By 12, she could hit a bottle cap from 50 yards. By 19, she was in the U.S. military, enlisted, proving herself in a world that looked at her and saw nothing. Later that day, in the mess hall, Elena sat alone at a corner table, her tray holding a simple ball of rice and beans. A group of soldiers at a nearby table, led by a loudmouth named Diaz, a stocky guy with a shaved head and a tattoo of a skull on his forearm, started in on her again. "Yo, Vasquez, you lost? The kitchen's that way," he said, pointing with a fork, his voice carrying across the room. The others laughed, one mimicking a cleaning motion with his hands as if she belonged with a mop. Elena took a slow bite, her eyes fixed on her plate, but her jaw tightened slightly, the only sign of tension. She set her fork down deliberately and looked at Diaz. "You ever run out of ammo in a firefight?" she asked, her voice even like she was asking about the weather. Diaz's laugh caught in his throat, his buddies glancing at each other, unsure. She picked up her fork again, took another bite, and the table fell silent. Their bravado deflated like a punctured tire. Ethan caught up with her outside the mess hall, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was 39, a SEAL veteran with scars from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, his face lined with stories he'd never tell. "How long you been training with the Barrett?" he asked, his voice gruff but curious, like he was testing her. Elena stopped, turned to face him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, but there was no fear in them. 4 years, she said, but combat time longer. No boast, no flourish, just fact. Ethan nodded, his mind turning. He'd seen sniper soldiers who talked big and folded when it mattered. But her, she was different. The way she'd shut down Brooks, Jenkins, and now Diaz, without raising her voice, the way she handled that rifle like it was part of her. It wasn't just skill. It was something else. Something that made his gut twist. Soldiers nearby overheard, their voices low and skeptical. 4 years? She's bluffing, one muttered, a stocky guy with a shaved head. No way someone her size is hitting anything with that thing. Ethan didn't turn. He kept his eyes on her, and she held his gaze for a moment before walking away, her steps steady, her bag bouncing lightly against her back. 2 days later, the base was a storm of noise and motion. A radio call came in at dawn, the kind that stopped hearts. A U.S. patrol convoy in the Kunar Valley was pinned down, enemy fire pouring from high ground. The command room was chaos. Maps spread across tables, radios crackling, officers shouting over each other. Major Marcus Bailey, the base commander, stood at the center, his face red, his voice sharp. He was 45, a career officer who trusted protocol over people, and he wasn't happy. "We need Overwatch now!" he barked, slamming a fist on the table. An officer, a lanky guy with glasses and a smirk that never faded, shook his head. "No snipers in range. We're out of options." Another voice, low and skeptical, piped up from the corner. "There's Vasquez, but come on, her?" The room turned, eyes narrowing, some rolling. Bailey's frown deepened, his mustache twitching. "Vasquez? The little one? You serious?" The officer shrugged, his tone dripping with doubt. "I don't trust her. Send her out. It's suicide." Elena stood in the doorway, unnoticed. Her beret slung across her back, the 50-kilo weight pulling at her shoulders. Her face was calm, but her knuckles were white around the strap of her bag. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "There's an observation point 2 kilometers out. I can clear their nest from there." The room froze. Bailey spun around, his eyes wide like she had just suggested jumping off a cliff. "2 kilometers? What? You think you're superhuman?" His voice was loud, almost mocking, but there was a flicker of desperation in it. The convoy was running out of time, and he knew it. Ethan, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, spoke up. "Let her try. I want to see it." His tone was calm, but his eyes were locked on her, searching for something. A crack, hesitation. There was none. Elena didn't argue. She didn't nod. She just grabbed the tariff in map, studied it for 10 seconds, and walked out. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Brooks, lingering by the door, couldn't resist. "Hey, if you missed, don't start crying," he shouted, his voice carrying across the yard. A few soldiers laughed, their voices sharp in the dry air. "Girls are only good with pistols," one added, a beefy guy with a tattoo creeping up his neck. Elena kept walking, her steps even, her face blank. The observation point was a jagged outcrop, exposed to the wind and sun, nothing but rocks and dust for cover. Elena set up the Barrett, her movements quick but precise, like she was assembling a puzzle she'd solved 1,000 times. The wind was picking up, kicking dust into her eyes, but she didn't blink. She adjusted the scope, her finger steady, her breath slow. Down in the valley, the convoy was pinned, the radio crackling with panic. "We're taking heavy fire! Where's our overwatch?" Bailey's voice came through sharp and impatient. "Vasquez, if you're not sure, don't pull the trigger. We don't have time for games." She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the scope, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. The enemy nest was a shadow on the ridge, 3,200 meters out. She could see movement. 3 figures, maybe 4, their rifles flashing in the sun. She exhaled, her body still, and squeezed. Boom! The Barrett's roar echoed across the valley, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. 4 seconds later, the radio crackled. "1 hostile down!" The voice was shaky, almost disbelieving. Ethan, watching through binoculars from a nearby ridge, muttered under his breath, "Uncanny." The enemy scrambled, their formation breaking. Elena didn't pause. She adjusted for wind, her fingers moving fast, recalculating. Another shot, another target dropped. The radio erupted again. "Second hostile down, they're pulling back." The command room, patched in through. The radio was silent for a moment. Then Bailey's voice came through, loud and sharp. "Impossible. That range is beyond training limits." Brooks, standing nearby, stammered, his voice small. "Must it have been luck?" But Ethan's eyes never left the scope. He saw her shift, her focus unbroken, her hands steady as she lined up another shot. The enemy wasn't done. A second group was moving toward a bridge, their shadows cutting across the valley floor. If they reached it, the convoy was finished. The radio screamed with urgency. "Vasquez! They're at 3,200 wham! You can't make that shot!" Bailey's voice was raw now, half order, half plea. Elena didn't respond. She was whispering to herself, her lips barely moving. Wind speed, air pressure, temperature, bullet drift. Her fingers adjusted the scope, her body still as stone. Ethan watched, his heart pounding, his binoculars locked on the distant ridge. 5 seconds felt like forever. Boom! The shot cracked, the sound rolling like thunder. The bullet sailed, arcing through the dry air. The radio went silent, then exploded. "Target neutralized! Enemy retreating!" The command room erupted in cheers, voices overlapping, but Elena didn't move. She just exhaled, slow and steady, and started packing up the Barrett. Back at the base, the air was different. The soldiers who'd laughed at her were quiet now, their eyes avoiding hers. Bailey stormed into the armory, his face red. "No way! She's just a spotter, nothing more!" he barked, but his voice shook like he was trying to convince himself. Brooks stood in the corner, pale, his usual grin gone. "Who are you?" "Really?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena removed her headset, her fingers slow and deliberate. "Just doing my job," she said, her tone flat like she was talking about changing a tire. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "No, you just set a world record." She didn't answer. She just zipped her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out, leaving the room stunned. Later that night, Ethan sat in his office, a single lamp casting shadows on the wall. He had pulled her file, but most of it was redacted. Big black bars over names, dates, missions. What wasn't blacked out was enough to make his stomach drop. Task Force Phantom, Black Ops, high-value targets. A 3,247mm shot, verified by 3 observers, buried as classified. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He'd heard stories about a sniper, a ghost who could hit targets nobody else could. He just never thought she'd be standing in his armory, taking crap from a kid like Brooks. He found her outside, sitting on a crate, cleaning her scope under the stars. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She didn't look up. "Records don't matter," she said. "Survivors do." He nodded, not pushing, but he knew. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a legend. The fallout came fast. Brooks was reassigned the next day, his cocky grin gone, his name now tied to the kid who'd mocked a record holder. Jenkins lost a sponsorship he'd been bragging about, some energy drink company that dropped him after forum posts went viral. Bailey's career took the hardest hit. His doubts, broadcast over the radio, had reached the wrong ears. His next evaluation was brutal, and he was passed over for command. Elena didn't stay long. She was gone within a month, transferred to another base, another mission. But the story lingered. Soldiers who'd never spoken to her knew her name now. They'd pass by the armory and glance at the spot where she'd cleaned that Barrett like it was a shrine. Ethan never forgot her. Years later, he'd tell the story to new recruits, his voice low, steady, like he was passing on something sacred. He'd describe her hands, her calm, the way she didn't need to shout to be heard, the way she had walked away, not looking back, her silence louder than any words. Before she left, there was one more moment. A week after the shot, Ethan saw he in the motor pool, checking a Humvee's tire pressure, her hands smudged with grease. A young soldier, new to the base, walked by and snickered. "What's she doing? Playing mechanic now?" Elena didn't look up, but her hands paused just for a second. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "You know who she is?" The kid shrugged, smirking. "Some chick." Ethan's eyes hardened. "She saved a convoy last week, 3,200 mares. You ever done that?" The kid's smirk faded, and he walked away fast. Elena glanced at Ethan, her expression unreadable, then went back to the tire. No words, no need for them. The base wasn't the same after that. The soldiers who'd mocked her didn't talk about it, but you could see it in their faces. Shame, maybe, or respect they didn't want to admit. The truth didn't need a megaphone. It just needed time. Elena's last day was quiet. She packed her gear, her movements as precise as ever, and left without a word. Ethan saw her go, standing by the gate, his hands in his pockets. She didn't look back, didn't wave. Her bag was over her shoulder, her steps steady, and then she was gone, a Humvee kicking up dust as it carried her away. Years later, Ethan would tell her story, his voice low, his words careful. He'd sit with new recruits, their faces young and eager, and describe her, the way she moved, the way she didn't flinch, the way she let the world underestimate her and proved it wrong. He'd tell them about the shot, about the convoy, about the silence that followed. He'd tell them about the woman who didn't need to shout to be heard, who didn't need to prove herself, because the proof was in the valley and the lives she'd saved. This story isn't just hers. It's for anyone who's been looked down on, judged, pushed aside. It's for the ones who've heard the laughter, felt the sting, and kept going. It's for the quiet ones, the ones who carry their strength in their hands, their eyes, their steps. It's for the ones who know what it's like to be unseen until the world has no choice but to look.